Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Really means a lot to me. Marco Basu from Stout. We're going to talk about investment banking. This is a topic that everyone's interested in. There's a huge wave of acquisitions in the space, especially when it comes to sites. I may or may not, along with Chris, we may or may not be involved in some right now as we speak with human clinical trials. May or may not. We don't know. But
Have no
we,
clue.
yeah, we may have no clue about it or a little bit to know. But Marco is here from Stout. Marco, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate you willing to share your expertise on this matter. I think a lot of sites will appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about it. I'm a long time listener, first time caller, so
Thank you
uh,
for that.
yeah, looking forward to this.
We appreciate that. What topics are you interested in when you do listen?
Anything and everything. I'm not an operator like yourselves, and so I don't fashion myself as an operating expert, but I do like to get to know businesses very well. That's part of what I do, and working with clients, part of the responsibility is to try to step in their shoes as much as possible so that we can be the most helpful to them and understand what they're going through, what their goals are, et cetera. And so, yeah, I just try to listen whenever I can, just to hear what you have to say, because I think, you're obviously speaking to the right audience and speaking about the right topics at the right time.
Thank you. Hopefully we could get you at SOS next year, Save Our Sites. I mean,
Absolutely. Yep.
you want access to like hundreds of sites. There you go. There's no better conference, and this is after coming back from ACRP. Shameless plug. I actually think ours is already better than that one, and that's been around for like 40 years. So, of course, I'll feel that way, but we got to
I
get you
believe.
there next year.
Absolutely. Yep. I wasn't able to travel for a little bit there, but yeah, I will definitely be at SOS next year.
Okay, thank you. Where are you based out of?
Chicago?
Oh, okay. So Oklahoma City's not too bad. Maybe
No.
an hour flight, hour and a half.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not too bad. It's very doable.
All right, we'll do. That's where it's gonna be next year. Um, well, Marco, Chris, do you have any questions maybe as a
Not
site
thus
owner
far.
or what our clients
Well,
are interested in?
so you specifically work with sites on acquisitions, right?
Yeah, so a little bit of background. We work with companies um, in all sorts of verticals. And so Stout, the company, we cover various industries from industrials to consumer to healthcare. I sit in our healthcare investment banking group, and that looks at a number of different sectors within healthcare in the life sciences space. So it could be labs, diagnostics, medical technology, med tech, but also healthcare services like doctors off PPMs or doctors' offices, and things like that. I specifically cover outsourced pharmaceutical services and technology. This is a space that I've been working in and around for the last decade, really ever since I got into investment banking. I was doing public accounting prior to that, but I got into investment banking about a decade ago and worked on my first M&A transaction that I closed was in the site space. It was Radiant Research, and that was sold to PPD, and one of the original deals in this space before this whole wave
Man, were you
happened.
involved? You were involved in that one?
Yeah, yeah.
That was
I
like
was
'09 or wasn't it around like
no, so the one that I'm referencing, I believe was 2015, I want to say.
okay, okay.
Yeah. And
I remember
so,
like when I first started in research in I started in '05, but around '09 there was another group called Radiant Research. They were SMO. They got one of the first ones to get acquired, and there was no YouTube or LinkedIn, so you would just read these like press releases and try to study these things. Small world.
absolutely. Yeah, well, I think that was the same one. So I think Radiant had gotten acquired by Clinical Research Advantage, and there's a couple different companies that came together. So probably the same one. And
Yeah.
ultimately, we sold that on the owner's behalf to PPD, and that I think became part of the
Okay.
backbone of AES.
So you were involved in the
Site
second
side.
sale of that, which is not uncommon, right? Someone buys the company, 5 years later tries to flip it, or the market's still hot or even hotter, tries to
Sure.
sell it to even bigger buyer. I feel like that's what's going on right now again, or am I wrong?
Yeah, I think definitely to some extent, and one of the last podcasts of yours that I listened to was about the private equity interest in this space and investor interest, and I thought that was really interesting, and I think I agreed with really most of the positions on that podcast, and I think the world is taking notice, investors are taking notice of the true importance of clinical research sites. And obviously the magnifying glass was put on the sector since COVID happened and the pandemic. And hey, look, how do we get our studies done? How do we push them through the pipeline? And who's touching the patient? And so that all became very, very relevant and came to the forefront. And we couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more because sites play an instrumental role. And so I think what we're seeing now as an effect of that is, okay, we understand sites are very valuable and in a way have been underinvested in for many years. And how do we turbocharge that? And what can we do to grow the site networks and grow the investment into it and the output. So yeah, I do think there's a bit of that happening now, and with good reason. There's a lot of challenges in clinical research. We get it. Like I said, I'm not an operator, so I don't experience it as much as you do on a day-to-day basis. But I hope you appreciate we don't take it for granted that it's a really hard thing that you all do, and just getting a patient through, enrolled in a trial and then through the trial is, those are monumentous tasks, which we appreciate.
No, thank you. I mean, it's definitely worth doing though, as a site owner. I know there's a lot of people complaining. Maybe sometimes I'm one of them. Uh, just to have like a funny meme on LinkedIn. Or I mean, it's truly frustrating at times, but at the end of the day, if you know what you're doing and you've built the right system, it's a worthwhile business to have. Um, owning a site is very rewarding as well. So, um,
Absolutely.
we appreciate that. It- why do you think there's so many sites getting acquired right now? Like in your, like, what's your best guess? Your educated guess?
Yeah. So like I said, I think it's a combination of factors. There's the attention that was put on this sector by the pandemic a few years back, and the attention it drew, and I think it opened a lot of eyes. Um, for the investment community, I think there's been challenges around other areas of the economy, and so as healthcare has grown into focus more and more, every year, we've seen government reimbursement rates change and go up and down, and that might make it tough to invest in certain areas. Whereas in the clinical research site space, it's just been, like I said, there's a really strong track record of delivery of actual results and value, and I think that's what people are looking for. And there's technology coming into play. There's a lot of new kind of changing asks and regulations from diversity, from patient access, more data. So there's all these trends that are affecting the space that make it really exciting, and we all know it's always been very necessary. And so I think that's a lot of it. And then look, to some extent, there's also probably a little bit of FOMO from investors because there have been some really successful transactions and brand names, and we're seeing over the past few years these really big elephants in the room or these big behemoth networks growing. And so I think, for this is a space where it actually reminds me of CROs. back in the 2000s, 2010s, where there were a lot of mid-sized CROs, and then suddenly they consolidated. And the last big transaction when Icon acquired PRA, and so you've seen this consolidation of various entities and businesses, and I don't think it's not necessarily the same, but there's shades of that, right? Where, hey,
Right.
look, there's a lot of different people in different places doing really good work. Can we realize some network effects by working together? Can we realize some efficiencies by working together, by having some standardization across businesses, and things like that?
That's a good comparison because I was around during that, but as a site owner, I mean, obviously I was aware of it, but I never thought about it from that perspective. But I think it does, now that you mention it, remind me of the CRO mergers and acquisitions of the early 2010s, maybe.
Yeah.
Do you think that, because that worked out fairly well? I mean, if you fast forward 10, 15 years later, there's still only have five big CROs and then just a very long tail of niche CROs. Do you
Mhm.
think that is going to be the case with research sites too? Like if you fast forward 15 years from now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I could definitely see it happening. I'm not going to pretend like I know the future and it will happen, but look, I think a lot of the market forces are there for that to potentially happen. I think it will be interesting to see where some of the how some of the larger names in the space continue to evolve. But right now there aren't really many public site businesses. I mean, there aren't
Right.
really any, right? Unless you're one of the networks under Icon or Uvia, there's not a whole lot of publicly owned
Yeah.
pure site businesses. So that's a
I
little
mean, the
bit
only
different.
one was that comes to mind was Science 37 that essentially was a penny stock that
Yeah.
kind of tanked. It was using the whole DCT model, decentralized clinical trial model.
Uh,
Uh,
Additionally, I would add the models are different, right, between a CRO and a site. And what I mean by that is
Yeah.
CROs aren't directly responsible for recruiting subjects, whereas sites are, right? And any site that can prove itself, at least in words, without actually physically doing a study, is going to have the attention of a sponsor, even if they're new to research. Um, CRO is completely different ball game, right? It's not about necessarily patient recruitment. It's more about physical site recruitment that can do the job, right? Which does
Yeah.
boil down to the sites. So I think I think those are two different apples and oranges, right? Really.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, they're two different businesses, but I think what's really interesting is as certain networks continue to scale and add capabilities, and do certain networks become junior CROs? And when is there a little bit of overlap in that Venn diagram? Ultimately, though, Chris, I agree with you. They are different business models, and um, for sure. But yeah, I think it's an interest. That's what's making this very interesting right now is, look, how can these different stakeholder groups continue to work together and continue to push the ball forward and advance research all together.
What a site network does offer, though, to a CRO specifically is the fact that then they can go to the sponsor and say, here, we're a full service CRO, true full service. Sites are on board. We have everything you need to get this study done.
Yeah.
And,
right.
here's our metrics for patient recruitment because we know what they are, right?
Mhm.
And here they are.
Absolutely. Yep.
So it's a true full service CRO in that regard. So that's
Yeah.
where it serves a purpose to CROs to buy these networks.
Right. The last
Yeah.
thing the last thing that's not a commodity. I mean, if you want to look at it just through purely like economical lenses, the last thing that's not a commodity in our space are the patients. Like, there's still,
Mhm.
it's still a very arduous task of getting a patient enrolled. It's a very case by case. Does this one qualify? Does this one not? If there is a way, and technology is trying to commoditize study participants, like just throw enough money at ads, fine tune the ads. I mean, Chris, we own one of these
Certainly.
patient vendors. They're getting pretty good.
But what do we tell anybody new to research? There's three hurdles, right, to being successful.
Yeah.
And in order of difficulty, they go get a PI, right? This is for an individual, that's not a doctor. That's your first hurdle, and it's the easiest one, though it doesn't seem like it at the time. Then get a study. Again, seems like the most difficult at the time, seems harder than getting a PI, which it is, but it's not harder than that third hurdle. That's getting patients for your studies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
that somehow becomes commoditized, and it sounds ugly to say because who wants to call patients commodities? But I mean, we've met these business financial people. They wouldn't think twice about calling them commodities. It's the last, like, that's the last thing keeping sites from just all being acquired and then plug and play. Because if it was so easy to get patients, you wouldn't really
Mhm.
need all these sites, right? You would just need like a couple big sites with trusted PIs there, and the coordinators are commodities basically. I mean, you have enough people even now out of work from CROs that have just been laid off that would be coordinators in a heartbeat. So really, the last hurdle is the patients, but I think the sites, and I do think that it boils down to the coordinators, like having a good coordinator to get a patient in. Because I've monitored at academic medical centers where it's the closest thing to having patients being commoditized because they have a seemingly endless supply of patients. The coordinators don't really put in the effort for the most part. I mean, if anyone's watching, I apologize. You're probably not in that category, but for the most part, they'd rather screen fail someone than go the extra mile to get them randomized. And at a smaller site, that's usually not the case. It's usually they have some kind of incentives to get the patient in that last mile. Now, can private industry do that if they consolidate a bunch of sites? Probably. I mean, I I see this working, which is kind of scary in a way as a small site operator. I
Yeah.
see potential
Well,
in
look,
it.
I think the last mile issue is the one. That's the key, right?
Mhm.
And that's why sites will always be vital, because it's not an easy problem to solve. And I think no matter how large the network and how successful a site network is, we're seeing that everybody can always try to improve on getting that patient in the door. And that is that last mile issue that makes sites so valuable, especially the ones that can do it well. Um, but and look, I think that again, that's why we think this is such an interesting space. And as we see a lot of this, the investment community or other, a lot of this M&A happening, I think where one of the things that we want to make sure, and this is why we thought it'd be useful to come join you here, is that as I've told business owners all the time in the past, that even if they didn't work with us, they should hire one of our competitors because M&A sometimes will become its own language and process, kind of like law or tax. And it's not meant to be a core competency of a site business or really any business because you should be doing what your task is, which is to see patients and help patients and advance research. And so, as there's this growing wave of M&A happening in this sector, we always encourage folks to think about hiring representation so that they can get the best outcome as
Yeah.
they're looking and speaking to various buyers and speaking to various parties that are around the hoop.
Marco, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
If you knowing what you know now, okay, from your side of things, from your vantage point, what would you do if you were a small site owner in, I don't know, a small city like, let's say Yuma, Arizona? Just throw one out there.
Mhm.
What would you do in this environment? Would you be stubborn and not consider selling your site and say, no, I'm going to be one of the last remaining independent sites. There's going to be value there. I think the market's eventually going to turn and there's going to be opportunities here. Or would you test the market? I'm actually really curious, and I'm also selfishly asking
For a friend.
for a very good friend.
Yeah,
He's my best friend.
yeah. Well, and I'm glad you asked because I think this is core to what we do. In the fact that I think when folks think of a banker, they think, oh, this is the numbers guy or girl or man or woman, and they're just gonna put push things into a model and spit something out and tell me what it should be. And I think there's a multiple layers of complexity beyond that. Yes, numbers are a part of it. But one of the first things that we do when we meet with a client is really talk about what are your goals. So, do you want to sell this business so that you can ride off into the sunset? Do you want to sell this business so that you can pass wealth down to your family? Is it about continuing a legacy? Do you feel so strongly about the Yuma brand name, for example, that you want that to live on? And it's really trying to understand what are your goals and what are your objectives. Do you want to stay with the business? Do you want to, if you're younger, maybe you say, hey, look, I'm just looking for some capital to help me get to that next phase. And maybe that's acquiring another site. Maybe it's building out a few de novos. Is it about that, or are you saying, hey, look, I'm kind of ready to wipe my hand. I've worked really hard my whole life. I've built a great business, but now I'm kind of ready to take it easy and move to Florida. And so, there's all these different, I think, decisions, variables that come into how we generate our recommendations about what you should do and who you should be talking to. So, not to cop out of an answer to your question, but I would say, look, if I had unlimited time, which I know you do not, you're a very busy man, but I would say it's never hurts to just feel out the market and see where things are. And because you might say, hey, look, we had a certain goal in mind, and if I feel like the market in its current conditions would let me do that, then maybe I would take it. But I think it's always good to keep your options open. But I do think it's a good market right now, and it's going to continue to be because of the macro tailwinds behind clinical research and what we're seeing. We think I think and my team thinks that this is going to be a great space to have a business in and to invest in for the next 5-10 years at least.
Mm, yeah, it's definitely an interesting situation, interesting market right now. I guess just to answer, Chris, feel free to talk about yourself too, but I think Chris and I, we're not done building sites.
Mhm.
Uh, and we've built YCT in like just 3 years. I mean, it's not like we've worked our whole lives to build this site. I think we got caught in the right market at the right time, and it'd be foolish not to explore. But to say that we're done and we're gonna go retire, no, that's not the case. Um, I also don't think I would do well working for someone else, which is
Not even Chris.
uh I would work
Least
for
of which,
I would work for
no.
Chris.
Oh,
No one else. No one that would actually buy the site. Like I'd work with them. I don't know about working for someone else. So to me, it would be very important to find the right buyer that would understand that. And thankfully, there are those that exist, and their incentives are actually aligned in that
Yeah,
regard. Um, there's a lot to consider, though, and for everyone's case is different. Everyone has a different situation that they're in. So this is definitely a
absolutely.
one-on-one kind of conversation.
Absolutely. And then again, and I think with the increase of attention in the space in the sector, it helps because it means there's more options out there. And that means hopefully there's more potential partners that can align with the various goals of various different sites because not every site will have the same goals, like you said. And For some, it might be a family business. For some, it's, it was a venture that, they didn't expect to be doing, but it turned out really well. And for some, it's a job or something. So I think for everyone it's different, and that's okay. That's how, that's how life is. And so the benefit now is, look, there's a lot of different types of investors or other networks that are growing that are looking for additional sites. And so that helps open up optionality for different sites. And then that's a part of my job is how do I bring, my job isn't to say, Dan and Chris, go do this this should be your partner, but rather it's to say, Dan and Chris, what are your objectives? And why don't I go find you some options? And at the end of the day, I can tell you how I can give you pros and cons of various options. But at the end of the day, it's to say, hey, look, here's a platter, and you make the decision that's best for you, and we'll help facilitate that.
Okay, so I take potential. Dan and I offer a consulting service for new individuals to research and established individuals as well. But I would say our services are primarily geared towards research naive individuals. They don't know how to operate a business. They have lots of questions, and that's what we offer. So one of the most common questions I get, so this is coming at you shortly, Marco, from me. One of the most common questions I get is not possible to answer, really, because there's so many variables. But I try to give the best answer I can, and it is, how much money will I make off of a study? Okay, so I'm going to ask you a similar question now. What's a typical deal look like that you see? Your most average deal?
Got it. Yeah, that is a tough one. I would say, so look, there's where Stout plays, there's various other banks, like there are various site businesses. I try to make an analogy here. And so ours, where we look, businesses, we'll look at businesses and work with businesses anywhere, call it from, a couple million of EBITDA up to maybe 50, 60 million of EBITDA. And so that's typically the size range, which seems big, but when you think about, there's also a lot of companies much larger and a lot of companies much smaller. So I would say, anywhere in that middle zone, that's where
your primary market is 2 to 50 million EBITDA, if I'm hearing you correctly, somewhere in that realm.
Yeah, it probably, yeah. I mean, that's where we traffic generally. I would say we probably average, on the, call it 10 to 25, but I would call out that whole zone.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, because that's where a lot of the businesses, in this sector are these days. As more and more as they've been building and more have been becoming more EBITDA positive, but obviously there's a lot that aren't there yet. And
so let's say I'm in that range. I'm in the 10 to 25 million. What does my multiples look like typically?
again, I will say
Again,
loaded,
I'm just asking for
sure.
average with no other data.
Yeah. Again, I'll say a little bit of a loaded question, so I want to be careful.
Sure.
But look,
I'm putting you on the spot like I get put on the spot every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it depends. It does depend on a bunch of variables, but you could say, it's going to probably be in the double digits. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. I mean, there's a lot of the factors that we would consider or think about. Is, for example, therapeutic diversification or lack thereof.
Sure.
And for some buyers, they might say, hey, look, if you're very focused in this one area that we really want to get into, we're going to ascribe a higher value. But someone else might say, well,
sorry,
we
can I
already
interject
have that.
real quick right there? What's the highest multiple you've seen? The highest.
I want to say it was around 17 times EBITDA. Yeah.
Right.
But look, I mean, that was the highest. I mean, and I think it's unrealistic to think that that most folks will see that.
Sure.
And I think it takes a special case where, there's a real
everything's aligned.
Exactly. Yeah.
for the buyer that they're seeking. It's the perfect option to them. But what what would you say is the typical framework for exiting by the ownership group? Is it they don't exit, they maintain a role 20%? Like
Mhm.
Dan said, he can't imagine working for somebody else. So this is more of a
Yeah,
curiosity from our perspective.
yeah,
Is it maintain a 20% role in the company and some operating stance? Or I mean, what's typical there?
yeah. Good question. And I would say it's again the number and the percentage could be fluid, or it is fluid, but and so anywhere from call it 5 to 10% up to 40%. But
Oh,
there's typically some of
ownership
that.
stake by the
Yeah,
original group? Okay.
yeah, and that is that's so that the buyer feels there's some security that look there's skin in the game, that you do want this to succeed, and there's a there's an added nugget of incentive for you for this to continue to succeed. And so and it keeps you involved, it keeps you engaged, and it's that's even 5% and can be pretty meaningful chunk of the pie, right, at the end of the day. So,
Certainly.
yeah, there's typically that. I mean, but look, sometimes given the circumstances, somebody or some group might be in a position where, they say, look, for us, we're not going forward, and maybe for a reason the buyer's okay with that. But I would say typically we see some ownership percentage going forward.
Yeah. That only makes sense in my mind. And I think if I were a buyer and I were looking to acquire a site and ownership said, no, we have no interest in staying on board, like zero, we want out entirely, my multiplier would come down substantially.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
I
just
mean,
saying for me, if I were a buyer,
I
yeah.
probably wouldn't do it at all unless they've proven they've removed themselves from the
yeah,
operations
that's a possible.
entirely,
I would
entirely.
I would still have a lower multiplier. Maybe not that much less, but it would still be a little lower.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, look, it helps if as a seller, it helps instill confidence in your buyer
Mhm.
that you believe enough in the business. And like I said, again, these are there's always there can always be exceptions. Maybe you just don't have a lot of ownership in the business. Maybe you're looking to monetize, and this is going to be the first and maybe only monetization event of your life, and so that's very meaningful to you, and you're ready to retire or something. That makes sense, right? But I think if you have the ability to continue investing in the business, I think yeah, my advice with seller is look, it will help instill confidence in the buyers that you believe in it, and hopefully for you. And oftentimes we do see this. Oftentimes sellers make more on that second turn when the
Yeah,
buyer after they've acquired the business and then they sell it,
yeah,
sometimes you make more on that because you had a meaningful stake, right?
sure.
So it's definitely is not something to discount.
Oh, absolutely. Now, with all this being said, there are buyers out there willing to buy 100%. I can give an example. Former client of our client services, they sold and were out entirely. They didn't tell me exactly for some reason, but they said they got between 6 and 8 time multiplier. So yeah, it's less than double digits, but it's still not bad.
No, not at all. And like I said, I mean, there's always factors for that, right? And I think
Hmm.
whether it's I think the multiples in this space have also drastically increased from years ago. And so and I
Oh
think
yeah,
right. So I
hugely
think
so.
exactly. I think if you were a smaller site, 5 to 10 years ago, it could be a couple
Like
turns
three. It was
different.
like three,
Yeah,
3 to 5.
right.
So
And so
now
you've
you're
seen,
now you're talking the teens potentially.
yeah. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's look, it's an interesting place to be, and I think it's a good place to be for operators, right? Because the values have improved over the years, and there's a lot of buyers out there who are interested.
Certainly. Well, I appreciate the answers. Dan, I've used all the questions I had saved up in case you had to disappear. So hopefully that does not happen.
I did not disappear yet. Um, no, no need to. We're looking good. Uh, I wanted to ask a couple more things. So, Stout, Do you guys charge the site? Let's say you're interested site watching or listening right now and say, okay, I'm interested in just exploring how this works.
Yeah.
Do you guys charge a fee or is there like any cost involved?
Yeah, so what we typically do is we structure a fee that is a success fee. So meaning if you want to, so look, if you want to explore, we don't charge anything for that. And if you explore and we work together and we signed an engagement letter that says we will help you through a transaction. If you ultimately transact, at that point, we would get paid a fee. But if you don't transact, then we would not get a fee. And so that's
Okay,
why it's purely a success-based fee.
So
good
you
to
don't
hear. Good
you
to
don't
hear.
charge like a monthly fee, 10,000 a month, say, to engage your services.
We talked to someone that
We do
was the
not.
case. 10,000 a month, man.
Yeah,
Like,
and that was just to get ideas and have a conversation opposed
yeah,
to the actual deal in which they also took a percentage of that.
we get ideas on this podcast for free, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We
right.
got plenty of ideas.
So Marco, you might
Uh,
be missing out on 10K a month, just
yeah,
FYI.
man. You might want to change that business model soon.
Yeah, I'll have to take that into consideration.
There, as soon as we heard that, we were like, thank you very much. We're done. So I'm glad to hear that's not the case with you guys. Sounds reasonable, actually. What advice do you have for sites looking, let's say a site owner is watching, listening right now. What advice? Like, should they avoid vaccine trials? Should they try to remove themselves from the operations? Like, what things should they start doing that they could just start working on even right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I would say as you're thinking about, and if you're thinking about doing something, whether it's soon, whether it's in a couple, this year, or whether it's a couple of years from now, um, the things you can do if you do talk to someone like myself, what we would do is kind of take stock of where is the business today. And so and we can start putting on the lens of how would a buyer look at this? And so what are the trends in backlog and pipeline and margins and what do your therapeutic areas look like? And I think so it's thinking about and talking to some professionals who traffic in M&A. And so they can give you a download of, hey, look, this is what the market is doing right now. This is maybe we would say, look, it's not a good time to test the market. So, continue running your business. Um, but the point is that getting some opinion on from a professional, taking a look at your financials. I think that's one of the areas that we see with founder-owned businesses where maybe the financials, the accounting isn't as clean as it should be because when you go to do an M&A transaction, your financials will be expected to be conformed to U.S. GAAP accounting standards, and so if they're not at U.S. GAAP yet, maybe it's worth exploring options about do you hire somebody outside, or do you do it in-house of getting somebody to kind of get you on US GAAP financial standards and accounting? It's really an accounting
And
lingo,
GAAP
but
is generally accepted accounting principles.
correct. Yep. And that's typically, and if you've heard of the quality of earnings analysis,
Mhm.
that's typically a third-party report that helps analyze and validate your earnings, and so your EBITDA. And so buyers typically will do that on their own. And so we usually advise that before a transaction to do a sell side quality of earnings report so that you have that analysis ready so you can proactively go to buyers and you can essentially give the narrative around the financials and be more proactive versus hearing about something and being on your heels later on in the process.
Is that something
Um,
their bookkeeper should already have, or like we have a CPA at the end of the year does our taxes throughout the year, every month does the bookkeeping. I also keep it separate with QuickBooks just to
mhm.
make sure that I can track my own numbers. Or would those two things kind of suffice, or is there a way to
Yeah, well,
merge
it
them?
depends. There's the cash basis of accounting versus the accrual basis. And so if you're on accrual basis, usually that's a really good step. If you're on cash basis, that can often require a little bit of additional work
Hmm.
to get it on an accrual basis. So look, I think that those are, I think the financial hygiene is generally kind of the category I'm calling out here, and just the ability to see how the business has performed financially, and then also just general operational metrics. That's another piece of advice for owners is to, you know, if you're not taking the best stock of your metrics on a maybe monthly basis or quarterly basis, to start doing that, because that will help tell the story to other parties. I think, you know, we're all guilty of, when we're in our own businesses and in our own worlds, it's easy to think that somebody can walk in and totally understand what you're doing, but that's often not the case, right? And so the more that you can do to standardize the reporting of your operational metrics, your financial metrics, the easier it is then to explain it to others and show it to others, and then prove out, hey, look, this is why we're growing, because we're doing these trials, and we're adding these trials, and our backlog's growing and our pipeline's growing. So, you know, I'd say it really comes down to just, you know, reporting and tracking data.
Do you do you have any tools like software recommendations?
Uh, I have no recommend. I don't have any recommendations necessarily, because I've seen folks do well with various ones. Obviously, Creo's a big name out there.
Yeah, we use Creo.
Um, yeah, real time. I mean, there's a number of vendors out there that, and I think they can, you know, they all are capable, and so, you know, I don't want to end up, you know, trying to advocate for one and bash another or anything
You're
like
not
that. But I think
sponsored by
there's
any, like sponsored by Creo or
no.
okay.
You know anyone that is?
Yeah. Shout out to Creo, guys. No, this is really cool. I think a lot of sites can get some value from this. Everyone can connect with Marco on LinkedIn. I actually just did right now as we were doing the interview. You have a lot of experience in the sector, so that's clearly someone who knows
Yeah.
what they're doing. And I really appreciate you coming on and agreeing to do this interview.
Yeah, I'm very you know, appreciative for you both to have me. I think, like I said, I think it's a really cool sector. I think there's a lot of excitement in and around it. And at the end of the day, we like helping companies achieve the value that they deserve and get the outcome that they're looking for. And that's what you know, that's what makes this job really fun for me. So you know, thank you for the shout out there. And yeah, I'm always looking to learn more, and we'll probably be seeing you at, you know, sooner than SOS, probably a different conference, I'm sure, at some point coming up here.
No,
So,
no more conference for me. I'm done. Only
No, you all
no,
SOS.
done?
no,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. There's one coming up in 2025, about a year from now.
Yeah,
Uh,
SOS.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, next year, you mean?
Other than SOS, I'm done. Between now and then, I've
no more.
mentally checked out of conferences.
So I know you said you primarily focus, Marco, on the health sector.
Yeah,
I'd assume your company has a number of different sectors of focus. Just out of curiosity, is is health the hottest sector,
it is one of them. That's a good question. It's yeah, I mean, I would probably put it up there
or
at
is it
or near the top,
tech?
because
Is tech higher?
well, I think healthcare is just as hot, if not hotter, because, you know, tech obviously felt some pressure starting in 2022, and that
Hmm.
industry was just, you know, the valuations were skyrocketing, and there's been a little bit of compression since then, but it's now recovering, and it's doing well. But I would say healthcare, you know, and then I think this is what makes healthcare so interesting. I mean, there's legislative there's always legislative impetus for change, and then there's always scientific impetus for change, right? And so when you
Absolutely.
put those together, healthcare is continuously evolving. And you know, what we saw with mRNA, for example, and you know, AI, and now technology, right? And so now AI and drug discovery, and people are trying to apply it to every single kind of subsector under the sun. And we'll see how that plays out. But you know, it is promising for healthcare in general, just to be evolving and adopting technology. So yeah, I think it's pretty much the hottest one.
One more curiosity question, just for me, and nobody
Yeah.
watching this is probably going to care about this question, but what would be a surprise sector that's hot? I mean, your colleagues tell you, hey,
Plumbing. Tell me plumbing.
yeah, like plumbing, farming, and
Mario Brothers Plumbing
what's a
Company,
surprise sector?
new startup.
Let's see a question. I would say a surprise. I don't know if
That most people would say, oh, really? I might
um
say that.
Online gambling, sports betting. It's got to be
Yeah,
huge.
anything.
yeah. I would say yeah, anything. Well, online gambling has taken off. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys are
That's going to create
on
new
any of those
addictions.
apps.
We're going to have new studies because of that stuff.
Yeah, maybe we can get ahead of the curve and online gambling tools for reform might be the new one because
We're going to need a new
yeah, I
drug for
definitely have a
that.
lot of friends who love those apps, and so they've been skyrocketing.
Yeah. Your company looks at other companies that are in that sector?
Uh, we don't as much probably in that sector necessarily,
Okay,
but maybe down the road. Can't say it's off the can't
sure,
say that we won't.
sure. So nothing really comes to mind. That's hot.
Um,
That's
He's
most people would be
focused,
like,
man. He's
no,
yeah, I mean
I
for
get it, but he's got colleagues
yeah.
he speaks with.
For me, I mean, pharma tech is hot, and I think
Okay,
there's just a lot going on in the pharma tech space that's yeah, even outside of sites and CROs, and so I think we're excited about where that's going, and cloud-based solutions and all of that. So
all right, fair enough. I understand. You're very focused.
it's
I
a, it's a hot
am,
sector.
yeah,
Oh, last one. Okay. It's not that often we get people like you on the show. So again, thank you. Uh, Therapeutic areas that you should focus on or try to avoid if you're looking to sell.
yeah. Again, I want to throw out a bit of a disclaimer because I think if your business is doing something that's doing it well, I never am one to try to sway an operator away from what they're doing well. And I think there's value for different things. You just have to find the right buyers for them. But I would say the from the what we've seen in the market, I think being super heavy or only heavy in vaccine, that's sometimes trickier on the sale process, but not to say it can't be done. But I think if you're trying to find an easier route to exit, just to think about, hey, look, how can we use that experience to find ways to diversify? And so can we use that experience to get into a couple other therapeutic areas? It's something worth exploring. But I would never tell someone who does vaccine trial because vaccine trials are here to stay. They're not
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
they're
Yeah.
not gonna go away. But do they will they get the same attention in the buyer's market? That could be a little bit different. So
And
Nice,
I think,
nice. Sorry, Dan. Nice disclaimer, but we've heard that from a number of places.
yeah, you're not the first. And as you were talking, I'm thinking about patients as commodities, which is a terrible way to think of things, but I'm putting my financial person's hat on. Vaccines usually want healthy volunteers. So it's actually the easiest type of patient to get. It's usually the easiest to convince them. It's just, here's some money. And as long as the IRB approves more money, here's more money. It's a lot easier to convince a patient to do a vaccine study than it is, let's say, someone with osteoarthritis to try a new treatment or someone with hypertension. So it's coming full circle, back to the original opening of this podcast. Patience is the toughest thing to really figure out here as far as getting them enrolled in trials. So yeah,
yeah, and look, we don't. I wouldn't say any of it's easy, but yeah, there's varying levels of difficulty out there,
yep,
and
yep,
yeah, it's something to be mindful of for sure.
yep. And also vaccines, yes, they do require good amount of patience, but Usually they only need a few sites because the sites go crazy and enroll like hundreds at each site. So something else to think about for you site owners. Thank you so much, Marco Basu. Everybody, his LinkedIn is underneath this video and in the podcast. Go connect with him right now. What are you doing? If you're thinking about exploring, you already heard the man. You're not gonna pay him anything unless you get acquired. Then yeah, then he'll talk. But I'm sure it's reasonable
That's right.
to reach out, reach out to Marco. And thank you, Chris, as well for asking the excellent questions.
Thank you, sir.
Anything else you want to add, Marco, that we didn't touch on?
No, look, I think it's yeah, like I said before, the sale process can often be complex and it can be long, but with the right advisors and people on your side, they can make it more efficient, they can make it better, and help you get the right outcome. And best of luck to all the site owners out there, and thank you for doing the hard work and helping people get better.
Thank you. Like,
Thanks,
subscribe,
guys.
comment, share, everybody. Go connect right now. Bye bye.